Welcome in today's science lesson. Today we are going to learn about food chains and food webs. And any healthy ecosystem usually contains many different habitats and a variety of organisms. The organisms living there interact in different ways within that ecosystem. Food is the most important food is the most important need of any living thing. So what we can conclude, we can say that for the organisms to interact very well in an ecosystem, they will form their first relationship in terms of feeding relationship, meaning they will relate on how and where they eat. Some of the organisms do the eating, other organisms are the food. For instance, when we talk of a lizard will eat flies. A chameleon will eat flies. When we talk of a lion will eat an antelope within that ecosystem. And when a lion eats an antelope, a lion is a predator while the antelope is a prey. We can learn slightly something on predators and preys. A predator, predators and prey. Predators and prey. For an organism to live in a particular habitat, it must provide adequate food or nutrients for that organism to exist very well. Plants make their own food, so we cannot liken them with animals. Animals, they don't have ability to make their own food. Animals can eat plants or can eat other animals altogether. Animals must consume other animals or plants to get their food. Animals that eat other plants are called animals that eat other animals are called predators. This is what we have written, predators. These are animals that eat other animals. Then animals that are eaten by other animals are called prey, the way we have indicated on the board. For instance, we can have a relationship whereby a cat eats a mouse. For instance, a cat eats a mouse. Now, in this situation, a cat is a predator, and a mouse is a prey. A mouse is a prey. Thank you. We can see that relationship. When two animals happen to be in the same habitat and they are competing for the same meal or the same kind of food, these animals, if they're existing in the same ecosystem, same habitat, and they're eating the same kind of food, they will compete for such a food. So if they do compete for such a food, then these animals will be called competitors. What we are saying animals that happen to exist in the same habitat and they live in the same habitat and they will compete for the same food. When they compete for the same food, we call them their competitors because their kind of meal, their kind of food is the same. And when we can give, for instance, we can have an example of a cattle. So if you have cattle in a farm, and then you decide to introduce a sheep in the same habitat, in the same farm, so you will find that the sheep that you have introduced in the same farm, they will compete for the grass. So we shall say the cattle and the sheep are competing for the grass. The relationship that is existing among them, they are eating the same grass, competing for the same type of meal. Therefore, the cattle and the sheep are competitors within such environment or habitat. When hyenas, for instance, another example, if you take hyena, when hyenas are introduced in a game bag, a game park that is inhabited by leopard. And we know that leopard feed on antelope. So we can say, if we introduce hyenas in a game park that is inhabited by leopards, we can say both the hyena and the leopards are competitors because they are competing for the same kind of food, and the food is antelope at that time. Therefore, we can talk of food chains so that we know how the animals are interrelated in terms of what they eat. Food chain. Now, when we talk of food chain, we shall start with our primary. What is the primary food that is present? Plants and animals use energy. Plants and animals use energy to grow, growing in day-to-day activities. Both plants will need energy. At the same time, animals would also need energy for their daily activities, which is true. The energy must come from somewhere. Therefore, we want to know where this energy that the plants will get energy from or the animals will get energy from. We are told that plants get their energy from sunlight. They are able to trap the sunlight from the sun and convert it into energy, and they are able to use that energy to produce food, which will be important for their activities. Therefore, we can see that plants get their energy from the sunlight and animals get their energy from the food they eat. Most animals, they eat plants as food and they get their energy from the plants they have eaten. We can give an example like grass. Example, grass. Now, when we are talking about grass uses energy from the sunlight to make food it needs to grow. The grass uses the sunlight from the sun to make the food, and that food will enable that grass to grow. But what about a grasshopper? We have grass and we have a grasshopper. Now, a grasshopper is an insect, and for a grasshopper to get energy to move, to do its daily activities, a grasshopper will feed on the grass to gain the energy, to get the food so that it has the energy to make its activities. So we can see that a grasshopper may eat grass to get the energy it needs, and a bird will eat the grasshopper, will eat several grasshoppers to get the energy they need. So we can see that here in food chain, the grass is a plant and has managed to make its own food through a process called photosynthesis. We shall reach there. After making its own food, we can see that now a grasshopper now is coming up and eating the grass to gain the energy. When a grasshopper has eaten grass to gain enough energy to make its daily activities, we find that birds now can come. And birds will eat several grasshoppers to get more energy to perform their daily activities. And to get their daily activities. When these birds die, for instance, when the birds die, they will be worked upon by bacteria. And these bacteria, yes, when the birds die, the bacteria will help to decompose the body of this bird. The bacteria will get the energy they need when they decompose the body of this bird. So we find that bacteria are important, but now they bring up a role as a decomposer. They will be able to decompose the body so that the body of this bird will break down into nutrients. And these nutrients will go back to the soil. When they go back to the soil, they will again be used by the grass to grow and to grow more. So we are saying there is a relationship between the grass, the grasshopper, the bird, the bacteria, and then back to the grass again so that the grass can also grow very well. We are saying the nutrients stored in the body of a bird are returned to the soil and help the grass to grow well and to improve because the bird has decomposed. The flow of energy from an organism to an organism is what we call as food chain. We are saying, what is food chain? We are saying food chain is the process whereby energy flows from one organism to another. The flow of energy from one organism to another is what we term as energy, food chain. We are saying grass will collect its energy from the sun and produce its own food. When a grasshopper wants to get its energy, it will eat grass and get energy from the grass that it has eaten. And here the birds are there. When they want to get energy, they will eat a number of grasshoppers to get energy that will enable the birds to perform their activities and to continue. Then when these birds die, if they are not eaten by any other animal, then they will be decomposed down, they'll be broken down into nutrients by the bacteria. If there are plants, then we have the fungi. It can also play that part of breaking the plants again into nutrients. Now we can summarily, we can give an example of this relationship. We can say we have the sun. The sun is not an organism, but it produces light. When the sun produces light, that light is trapped by grass, well, yes, which is okay. And then the grass will be eaten up by the grasshoppers. Grasshoppers to gain, yes, the grass will be eaten up by the grasshoppers to gain food, and that food will give it its energy to perform daily activities. Then from the grasshoppers we have birds. And birds will eat a number of grasshoppers to get enough food to provide it with enough energy that can be able to make these birds perform its daily activities, which includes flying and looking for other grasshoppers, and so forth. What we are saying after the bird, then we say when the bird dies, if it's not eaten by any other animal, if it dies, then we have bacteria, and these bacteria will be able to break down the body of this bird into nutrients. And it will also be able to get the energy it wants from this bird so that the bacteria can continue to perform its activities. Then nutrients that are going to be broken down will go back to the soil, and when it goes back to the soil, the grass again will collect those nutrients and will be able to grow well. We are saying this, the sun is not an organism. We have indicated the sun here because it is the primary source of energy. The sun produces light, and that light is taken up by the grass, and the leaves from the grass, and the grass changes that light into energy, which is okay. We want to learn, from this we can learn about the producers and consumers, yes, and decomposers. We want to know in this food chain, who are the producers and who are the consumers, and finally, who are the decomposers. Yes, producers, consumers, and decomposers. What we can say on producers, we can say food chain begins with the sun. Food chain begins with the sun. The sun gives out light energy. That's what the sun does. It is able to provide energy in the form of light. The plants have an ability. The plants are able to trap this light energy. When they trap this light energy, the sun's energy, they trap this sun's energy into their leaves using a chemical called chlorophyll. There is a chemical, chlorophyll. There is a chemical called chlorophyll that exists in plants. This chemical called chlorophyll is the one that enables plants to have that green color. When we talk of plants that are able to manufacture their own food, we must specify only green plants have that ability of manufacturing their own food. Non-green plants, they cannot be able to manufacture their own food because they lack this chemical called chlorophyll. But green plants have this chemical called chlorophyll that enables them to tap energy from the sun. And when they tap this energy from the sun, they are able to combine this energy, the energy from the sun, together with carbon dioxide. When they combine with the carbon dioxide and water, they are able to manufacture food called simple sugar called glucose. This is the kind of food that the plant will be able to manufacture and it will distribute within its body in different areas of the grass of the plant so that it can perform its activities very well. We are saying oxygen when chlorophyll is combined, when it's trapping this energy and it uses this energy to combine with the carbon dioxide and water, we say the byproduct that is the byproduct or the waste product that is found when glucose is formed is normally oxygen. Oxygen is a byproduct during this process of chlorophyll performing this activity of combining carbon dioxide together with water to form glucose as food. Oxygen is given out as a byproduct. And we call this whole process of green leaves manufacturing its own food as photosynthesis. We can have a slight diagram, plants that can produce their own food, so that they are called, because plants can produce their own food, then we can call these plants producer organism. We can call green plants that are able to produce their own food, we can call them producer organisms or producers, because they are able to produce their own food, unlike animals which will have to eat plants to get food or to eat other animals. We can have a slight diagram demonstrating this relationship, how the sun energy is trapped by chlorophyll, carbon dioxide plus water for manufacture of glucose, and oxygen as a byproduct. We can simply have the following diagram to illustrate this relationship. One, we can have the sun up there, then we say those are sun's rays. We can have a slide diagram, and we believe that is a picture of a leaf. Okay. I think leaves have some veins. We can refer those ones to be veins within the leaves. Then we can have our chlorophyll here. Yes, we have our chlorophyll. Yes, there. Then from chlorophyll, we have this is energy. These are rays. We believe the rays that are coming from the sun, they meet with the carbon dioxide. When they meet with the carbon dioxide, the results down here is glucose. Yes, we get glucose. And then from glucose, what we get here, we are saying the byproduct of, we shall have oxygen. Oxygen will come as a result of byproduct. So we can see this is the process we call photosynthesis, where the green leaves are able to trap the sunlight. When they trap the sunlight, and then we have a chemical called chlorophyll. This chemical called chlorophyll, together with the carbon dioxide plus water, they are able to manufacture glucose as food. So glucose will be the one that will be used by the plant, and then oxygen will come out as a result of a byproduct. So, in simple terms, we are saying plants are able to manufacture their own food, but animals don't. Animals don't manufacture their own food. They get their food by eating plants or eating other animals. So we are saying animals cannot produce their own food. They must eat plants or other animals to get energy and nutrients they need, which is okay. Now we are saying animals are therefore called consumers, because what they do consume. We are saying all animals are called consumers because they consume plants or they consume other animals to get their energy. Therefore, we refer to these animals as consumers. And because plants are able to manufacture their own food, then we call these plants producers, or we call them producer organisms, as I had communicated earlier. We are saying consumers such as grasshoppers, birds, sheep that eat only plants are known as herbivores. We are saying, when we talk of consumers, we are saying animals that only eat plants. They don't eat meat. And we have given an example of consumers such as grasshoppers, birds, sheep. They eat only plants, and we have said they are known as herbivores. Then we are also saying consumers such as lion, leopard, they eat other animals. They only eat other animals. We call them carnivores. Carnivores are animals that eat other animals. They don't eat plants, they don't eat grass. We call them carnivores. Then we have another type of relationship when it comes to food here. We say we have omnivores. Omnivores are consumers that eat plants and animals. These they eat all. They eat plants, at the same time they also eat animals. And a better example of such a kind of relationship where we have animals that eat plants at the same time they eat animals, we have bears. We have animals called bears. They can eat plants, they can eat animals. Even human beings are best example of animals which can eat human beings. Human beings are best example of animals that are omnivores. They eat plants and they also eat animals at the same time. We are saying where plants or animals die without being eaten, its body is broken down by the decomposers. We have situations whereby you find some animals, whether it is luck or we don't know, some animals are not eaten up by others. And when they die, what happens to them? We have decomposers. The decomposers come up to decompose either plants or animals which have died without being eaten. If they are plants, then we have fungi. Fungi is there to decompose the plants into nutrients and so forth. And we have bacteria. Bacteria are there to ensure that they break down the dead animals or waste matter into nutrients, and they also acquire their own energy to exist. So fungi and bacteria are very important, and they're called decomposers because that's their work. They work on dead animals or waste products. In the food chain, we are saying grass is the producer. In the food chain, we are saying grass is the producer and is the first order. We are saying in the food chain, the grass is the producer and the grasshopper is the first order consumer. I would like to draw that relationship where we have grass as being the producer and grasshopper being the first consumer. So we can have our grass, and we have said the grass is the producer. When the grass is the producer, then the grasshopper that eat this grass, they become the first consumer. The first consumers, we have said those are the grasshoppers. So the grasshopper becomes the first consumer. But we have the second consumer. If this grasshopper is eaten by the birds, then the birds become the second consumer. So we see the birds becoming second consumer because they are getting their energy from the grasshopper. Then when we go to birds, and then we say maybe the animals which feed on birds, then that animals that feed on the birds will become a third consumer. But what we are saying, in order to show such a kind of relationship, we can say in another food chain, you can have a lizard we can have a lizard that could eat a grasshopper. So you can find that if we include, in another food chain, we include a lizard here, for instance, and we say there is the first consumer was a grasshopper. Now the second consumer will not be the bird, but it will be the lizard will be the second consumer, and then you will find out that the bird becomes the third consumer and no longer the second, because between the grasshopper and the bird there is a lizard. So we are introducing another consumer altogether. So the bird will no longer be the second consumer, but a third consumer, because a lizard has taken up the power. It is now the second consumer. That's another food chain. This is what we can show this relationship as follows. You can have grass. Then from grass we have grasshopper. Yes, grass, grasshopper. Then we have our lizard. Then from our lizard, we have the bird coming up. This is another way of showing a food chain. In the above chain, the lizard is the second consumer, and the bird is the third consumer in such a relationship that we have shown. Now, we want to touch on, we have been talking about food chains, but we want to see what are food webs. Therefore, let us concentrate and see what food webs are. From many food chains, they formulate food webs. On food web, we are told the following. We can give an example of a pond, and in a pond, it has got many ecosystems in a pond, and we say that we can have small fish within the pond, and small fish are constantly in a fear. They don't know what's happening, because once they go to the surface of the water, there is a danger of these small fish being caught up by the birds. The birds can catch them up there. When they go close to the edge, the frogs are there waiting to eat them, and also the birds. And when they go deep in the sea, in the pond, there is also risk being eaten by larger fish. So what can we say? We can say at the edge, the small fish are in danger if they go to the edge of the ponds, and the birds are alert, and they could conclude this an easy meal. So we can say small fish can be included in the food chains for most predators around the pond. The situation is common in many ecosystems. Each animal consumes a variety of food, and animals, they consume a variety of food. Each animal consumes a variety of food, but it's also the prey of a number of different predators. What we are saying, we can have a grasshopper. We can have for instance, in a pond, we can have a pondweed that is being eaten by small fish. Then from small fish, you have birds that will feed on the small fish. And then from the bird, we can have the decomposers. That can be one of the example of a food chain. But we can have another example of a food chain within the same pond. We can have a pondweed that is being eaten by insects, and then these insects are being fed on by birds. Then birds, and then when they die, the decomposers are there. Decomposers, which are the bacteria and the fungi and so forth. This can be an example of one food chain, but remember the first example we gave was pondweed. Then we had, instead of insect, we were saying we have small fish. Then we have birds. And then lastly, the decomposers. That can be another example of a food chain, but we can have also another example where we have pondweed. Then from pondweed, we can have small fish, then large fish, and then last we can have a bear. We have bears that feed on big fish and so forth. We have bears. Yes, bears that food on. All these different kinds of food chains that can exist in a particular pond, when we combine all of them, is what we can refer as food web. When joining a number of food chains, when we join a number of food chains together, when they come together, then they produce what we call as food web. Changes, we can talk of changes. Any change that can occur in a food web can bring an effect within that ecosystem, can bring a change in that food web. For instance, if we decide to subtract maybe the insects, if they are not there, then the pigweed will grow a lot because they are not being eaten by the insect. And the birds might even disappear because they are missing the insects which they were supposed to feed on, and the pigweeds are there. So what we can say is changes often occur in food webs as population of different organisms. The population of different organisms can increase, decrease, or they can completely disappear. For instance, when we talk of a pond, we have the tadpoles. Tadpoles, these are young frogs. So when they are tadpoles, they can still be eaten by fish. Fish can eat tadpoles, is true, but after 1 week, these tadpoles can change into frogs. When they become frogs, then they cannot be eaten by fish. They change. So therefore, we are saying in any food web or ecosystem, situation can change, and you find that when it changes, it can affect others. So we are saying if the tadpoles disappear and they become frogs, if before they change, there were enough food for the fish, but when they change, there would be no longer be the food eaten by the fish, but now even birds can start feeding on the frogs because they've changed. They were tadpoles, but they've come into something else. We shall draw a diagram to illustrate what a food web is. We can have large birds here. Then we can have beetles somewhere. We can have beetles, and then we have insects called aphids in this food chain. Then we can have grubs. On this other side of food web, we can have small animals. There can be rats, small animals, e.g. it can be a rat, that's a small animal. Then we can have small bird. Then from small birds, we can have snails. Then from snails, we can have plants. Now, we are going to use an arrow to demonstrate which organism is eating what organism. For instance, from plants, we can have an arrow towards the grubs, showing that the grubs do eat plants to gain their energy. And we can also have one arrow from grubs going to the small birds. Yes, to the small birds, indicating that small birds do eat grubs. And from the snails, they also get their energy from the plants. So snails do consume plants, and small birds can be eaten up by bigger birds. Therefore, we can have an arrow from the small bird pointing towards the larger bird. And when we come to animals, to our beetles can also be eaten by the bigger, large birds. And at the same time, they can also be eaten by the small birds. So we can have an arrow showing small birds that they also feed on the beetles. And when it comes to aphids, we say aphids feed on plants. We can have an arrow coming from the plants to the aphids. Then from aphids, we can have also an arrow indicating that aphids can also be eaten by the small birds. Now, The above diagram is showing what we call a food web. It is explaining that we can have a larger bird, and this larger bird can feed on animals, small animals like rats, and it can also feed on beetles. That's what the food chain there is showing. But we are also seeing that also these beetles, yes, beetles can feed on aphids, so we can have an arrow from aphids pointing towards the beetles. And then, yes, grubs are only eaten by the nets. So beetles, aphids can be eaten by beetles, and then the beetles can be eaten by the small birds. Then small birds can be eaten by larger birds. So we can have an arrow from small birds pointing towards the larger birds. So we can see the interrelationship of food chain that is being shown here, meaning that animals can be eaten by several predators, and you can find some of the predators are also eaten by others. For instance, we can see that small birds are eating beetles, they are eating insects like aphids and grubs, but the same small birds are being eaten by larger birds. And when we go to small animal, we are seeing small animals, they must be eating, they must be feeding somewhere. The small animals feed on plants. They feed on plants to gain their energy. Then from when they've gained the energy, they are again eaten by larger birds. So we can see the interrelationship of this organism, what they eat and how they are eaten, and those that are up there on the hierarchy of food web, like the larger bird that maybe is not being eaten by any animal or any other organism. Maybe when it dies, it will decompose, and the decomposers will be there to work on them. What is very important in terms of this relationship, we are saying, yes, what is very important in this relationship, we are saying plants and animals, when they die, if they are not eaten, for instance, if these larger birds are not eaten and they die, then the bacteria are there to ensure that the body of a dead bird decomposes. But if the plants and bigger trees, also decide to die, then fungi are there. We have the fungi are there to ensure that these plants decompose. After covering that food web, then our next topic shall be on impacts of ecosystem on plants. Because if human beings interfere with this ecosystem, then there will be an effect that will be there in the ecosystem, and some of the organisms will either die or go to exit, or they will disappear completely, depending on human activities that will impact on this ecosystem. So human activities can affect the food chains, and can affect food web. That is the end of the lesson today.